Hello, hello. Welcome. Let me just get my screen set up here. Okay, excellent. Check my volume. Awesome. I think we're ready to roll. Welcome. I am Kathy Lemire. I'm the menstrual money coach. And what that means is I am a financial coach for women who whose menstrual cycle tends to wreak havoc on their lives, leaving them feeling exhausted from the hormonal roller coaster that has them up and down all throughout the month and making it feel impossible to set any goals, let alone reach them. So today's talk for you in the Soulful Wellness community, I'm excited to be here with you, is talking about how getting in the flow can help you, and embracing your cycle can help you get off of that hormonal roller coaster and be able to sustainably set and reach your goals so that you too can stop bleeding money every month. Um, with all that being said, before we dive in, let's just do a little housekeeping here. I always like to start with a grounding exercise because I know for many people, talking about money can bring up a lot of stuff, whether that's anxiety, insecurity. Money still remains one of the top stressors in people's lives, whether you're partnered and coupled up with someone or, excuse me, or you're on your own. Um, Money is a big part of that. So I would actually even invite you, if you want, to pause this video and maybe pop in some AirPods and go for a walk while you listen to this. It's one of my favorite things to do is walk and talk. It'll help you kind of move that stress, anxiety through your body so it's not being stored. Also, by getting out of our head and into our body, we can focus a little more easily. So if you want to pause now and do that, I invite you to do that. If you're going to stay here on video with me, let's just come into a grounded and centered place, feet flat on the floor. Take a deep breath in through the nose and hold. Fully exhale. We'll repeat that a few more times. And exhale. Take your fingertips together. Feel them touching one another. Can you feel the ridges on your fingers? Trying to get into our senses. Take one hand, your fingertips, rub the palm of your other hand. Feel your feet on the floor. If you're out walking, take a deep breath. What is the air like outside? Is it warm? Is it cool where you are? Is it humid? Is it dreary? Let that air fill your lungs. Okay, here we go. So, how did this topic come about? Well, mostly through my own journey. And as I started speaking about it more and started talking to my clients, my financial coaching clients that I already had, I started to notice a very similar pattern with many of them. So the more I started to dig into it, and the more I started to look for answers in my own life that could explain what I was going through, it just, things opened up for me. So a little bit about me. I came to financial coaching through my husband and I's own struggle with money. We were, just kind of doing all the things that people do. We were, newly married. We had, after, let's see, we got, in 3 years, having our first child, wanting to buy a home. We still had tens and tens of thousands of dollars worth of student loan debt when we were married, newly married. And, neither one of us came from a childhood or upbringing where we were taught about money or saw parents being really responsible or good with money. And so neither one of us really had a solid financial foundation when we got started. We both had our own money stories from childhood. I will share my story is that my father died when I was very young, and it rocked our security. And we went from, well, as a child, me feeling secure to I don't know how, I still don't know to this day how my mother was able to care for us. And it gave me really a sense of like, I don't really know what I want to be when I'm older, but I know what I don't want to be. And I will never be in that position again. And that's important to note because fast forward 2 decades, 3 decades later, um, my husband and I are fighting terribly over money by this point. Um, Still tens and tens of thousands of dollars in debt. We knew we roughly should be doing all of the things. We knew we should be trying to save for retirement. We knew we wanted to pay off the debt. We knew we should have savings in case of an emergency, but we really didn't know how to do any of that. And we're fighting terribly over money all the time. So we couldn't even really have a constructive or productive conversation about money at all. There was so much emotion and feeling tied to those conversations. So with our, excuse me, 6 of water. So with our marriage in one of the most challenging seasons we have been in, and we have had many challenging seasons in our marriage, and not between the two of us, but with family circumstances and dealing with death of parents and everything. um this was the one that nearly broke us. And we were talking separation. I was laying in bed at night full of anxiety and my mind just spinning and spinning. What if something happens to him? Until I had a complete meltdown. Complete. I remember it was I had 4 little kids at this point, and I had left my job working outside of the home, which was something that I enjoyed. And we had been on our Christmas holiday break, and like the day after the kids were to go back to school, we had a snow day. And I remember, and they were all like bonkers, right? Like they were so excited. It was snowing, it was pretty, they didn't have to go to school, all those things. Um, but it was like 8 a.m. And I remember sitting in the floor with my kids already going like crazy around me, and my husband getting ready for work and thinking, you can't leave me here with them. You can't leave me here another day with them. It's already been like 10 days straight, 14 days straight, actually. I can't, I can't do another day. And I remember him just walking out the room, and I had the realization of that position I never wanted to be in, which was dependent and reliant, and we were fighting about money. I had just worked my butt off for 2 decades to end up exactly where I didn't want to be. And that sent me into a downward spiral for several months until I finally was able to convince my husband we needed to get help financially. Because he was reluctant. His point of view and his perspective, and I remember him saying to me, "This isn't rocket science, Kath. We just have to spend less than we earn." And I said, "Yep, uh-huh. You know that, and I know that, and neither one of us is doing it. So we've got a problem. There's a gap somewhere between what we know we should be doing and what we are doing. And, all this time we kept saying things like, well, when that next job promotion comes, then it will get easier. When our children are no longer in childcare, things will get easier. When this happens, then. And, so we were looking for all of these external things that was going to fix what was happening internally for both of us. We had no plan. We had no idea what our values were. We had no idea what our priorities were. And we really didn't even know how we should even be able to begin to tackle this problem. So reluctantly, my husband decided, okay, let's get help. So we do. And it was life-changing for us in that a month prior, we had been looking at our money and saying, how are we ever going to do this? We're literally overdrawing our account every month. How can there be any extra to have any momentum towards any of this? And well, wouldn't you know, when we start working together and communicating and have a plan, we were able to pay off our debt and have a fully funded emergency fund within 18 months. Now, we had struggled for over 10 years by this point in our marriage with money. 10 years. And here we were 18 months later in a completely new financial situation. I had hope for our future. I had hope for our kids' future. Our marriage was in a much better place. And what I found was that while we were going through this process, it was so life-changing for us that I was telling everybody I knew about it. And so as I was looking for that next step in my life, my friends and family were like, you should do this, you should do this. And it felt like a very natural progression for me, and is one of the most rewarding things I've done professionally. So I decided to launch my financial coaching business, and things were going great. I'm coaching clients and they're having these amazing transformations and they're feeling hopeful about their financial future. And I started to notice, well, truth be told, I wasn't the first one to notice it. My husband was the first one to notice that every couple of weeks, when we would sit down to have our budget meetings, our spending plan meetings, whatever you want to call it, sometimes they just didn't go very well. We were still kind of bickering a little bit. I was really irritable. I physically could not make myself sit down and do it. It was like pulling my hair out. I would be looking at the numbers. I couldn't make sense of them. And I started to really feel some imposter syndrome at this point, because here I am helping other people do this. And there were times I just couldn't do it. And I couldn't figure out why. And so it was after several months of this pattern that my husband suggested, do you think it has something to do with PMS? And I was ready to be like, oh, don't you dare. Don't you dare go blaming my PMS and my hormones on this because you didn't do blah, blah, blah. Right. And then we kind of fell back into those bickering patterns until I started to notice he's right. And I started to track and I started to notice during that time, during that PMS phase of my cycle, I just couldn't do it. It was too overwhelming. I would feel that anxiety begin to creep up. And then I kind of started noticing. So once I was very aware and I was then now going to my doctor saying, hey, I'm experiencing this and I'm losing a lot of productivity, the anxiety and the overwhelm I feel. I'm not showing up as the mother I want to be. I was snapping at my kids, I'm snapping at my husband. And it took some digging, it took some me really being an advocate for myself and my own health to get some answers. And I was so glad that I was able to do that. However, while I did take those steps, I started to notice some other shifts as well. And what I started to notice in my clients was that they were experiencing the same thing. That one client, she would show up and one week she was like, I did it. I'm killing it. Look at my numbers are all done. Look, I even planned ahead for next month. And I know the month after that, I have this coming up and I feel like energized and like this is so exciting. And we'd have this amazing session that was upbeat and positive. And then this same client would show up 2 weeks later because I meet my clients on a two times per month, and her body language was different. And I would just hear, I suck. I blew it. I told you. I told you I'm just no good with money. And, it would just be this like negative spiral. Or if I was working with a couple, they were fighting again. And so I simply just started to ask, well, where are you in your cycle? And 9 out of 10 times, well, I'm just about to start. I'm just about to start. I'm about to start my period. Okay, let's lean into that a little more. Take me back to when this argument happened. When was that? Take me back to when you feel like you blew your budget. When did that happen? And so the more conversations we had about this, the more I started to realize how much of an impact our menstrual cycle plays in our everyday life that we, by and large, just ignore and don't really pay attention to it until things start going wrong. Until you're like me and you're in your 40s and you're perimenopausal and you're saying to your doctor something doesn't feel right. Right. And most of that is because that's how we're taught. It's still a very like I remember as a teenager not really talking to my girlfriends about having our period. We still called it, like Aunt Flo's visiting and didn't have open conversations about it. And um it's just not something we ever really openly discussed. And I'm almost embarrassed to say that I was in my 40s before I could even tell you what the four different phases of my menstrual cycle are. And so the more research I started to do and look into this, it just felt like a very natural progression for me. And when I started to implement cycle syncing, which is a huge part of what I do with my clients and how they manage their money, we started seeing really incredible results. So, to just go into cycle syncing a little bit, what that looks like. So, that's knowing where you are in your cycle. That's the first and foremost, right? You need to know where you are. So are you tracking, or are you just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm feeling kind of crampy, I'm feeling a little irritable, I know my period's coming, and you don't pay attention to anything else the rest of the month. So cycle syncing is looking at each phase. We have 4 phases of our cycle, and looking at each phase as really its own unique superpower. And when we do this and we lean into it, what we're doing is we're coming to a place of connection to ourselves and to our body. And we're slowing down and listening to what our body needs. It's the same thing when it comes to our money, right? So many people, one of the first mistakes people make is that they think that they can solve their money problems as a math problem, and it's not. It's not a math problem. Many of our spending habits that are that we feel like are out of control, or our finances aren't where we want them to be, or our overall picture of what our financial picture looks like, our personal finances, is coming from a place of being disconnected, right? We're not connected to what our values are, our goals are, our priorities are. So we just swipe, I'll figure it out later, right? That is being disconnected. That is not in alignment. When we ignore our cycle, and that might look like you said yes to things you didn't really want to say yes to, and now you are really not wanting to go because you didn't look at maybe where you were in your cycle. And I get it. Like sometimes there are things that we just cannot get out of when we commit to things. But what would it look like if we could adjust our calendars by even 10%, by knowing where you are in your cycle and what you have coming up in the next month? What shift could happen if we looked at our calendars and said, it's not going to be a good week for me for that, so I'm going to say no. So each of our the phases of our cycle. So our first phase, which I really think of, like, we think of it as the first part of our cycle because it's the obvious one, right? Like our menstrual phase, when we start to bleed, it's when you go to the doctor and what's the first thing they ask you? What was the first date of your last period, right? And most of us, I mean, well, maybe not most of us, I'll speak for myself, was like, I don't know. I have no idea. And because we're not tracking, we're not really paying attention. But really it's the end. And once we, I kind of talk about this further, maybe it'll make more sense, but it's an obvious start date for when your next cycle is. So for our purposes today, we'll say it's the first part of your phase. So that's your menstrual phase. And what is it that you want to do during that menstrual phase, right? You want to rest. You're bleeding. You might be crampy. You feel just kind of, and you're tired, right? Your body's doing a lot of work. So when we take this time and we actually honor that part of our cycle and what our body's trying to tell us, and we rest, it preserves our energy as we go into the next phase of our cycle. I've had clients do this, and what they tell me is that because they knew where they were, and that they weren't going to feel like this forever, and they stopped mentally beating themselves up of, oh, what's wrong, like, why do I just feel so lazy, and just said, no, this is just where I'm at, they actually had more energy and a more positive outlook. So our menstrual phase is really a time for us to rest, for us to reflect on the progress we made during our last cycle, and really just honor our body. So this would be a time, as it relates to our money, to have those like introspective conversations with yourself of, where am I in my plan? Am I in alignment with where I want to be? It's a great time to journal those things out. Then as we move into the next phase of our cycle, and how long these last are going to vary for everyone, right? But the next phase of our cycle is called the follicular phase. And this phase of our cycle is our hormones are increasing. So you're going to start to feel that energy pick up. And the things that just felt so like, oh, last week, you now have energy for. And this is a great time to be planning ahead and thinking ahead. You're more creative at this point. This would be a great time if you have a big project at work to work on that, or to have like a brainstorming session, something like that. And this is where you really want to be, again, looking out at that big picture. What do you want for your life? What do you want the next 3 months to look like, or next month? What are the big projects that you want to tackle during this phase? right? So if we get off of the 24-hour to do, this is what I need to accomplish this week, and start looking at, well, what do I want to accomplish during this cycle, right? We're not built to show up the exact same 24-hour cycle every day in and out. As women, we're not. We cycle on a 28 to 30, 32 day cycle. So this is a really good time to start thinking, okay, what is it that what goal would I like to reach during this cycle? And then as we move out of our follicular phase into our ovulation phase, this is our most outgoing phase. So this is our ovulation phase, is when we are most wired for connection, to be extroverted, outgoing. This is the time, like if you have to plan something social on your own calendar, looking at your ovulation period within those few days would be a great time to plan those things. Your stress is going to be lowest, and we are just wired to want to connect. For me in my business, what this looks like is one of my favorite things to do is be a guest on other people's podcasts. And so I will only schedule those interviews during the ovulatory phase of my cycle. That's it. Because how do you think my energy is going to be if I showed up at the height of PMS? Do you think my energy is going to be the same as during my ovulation phase, when I know I'm feeling more extroverted, more articulate, I have better energy, I'm excited about what I'm doing and what I'm talking about? I'm going to present so much better than when I'm in the thick of PMS, right? So making those shifts where we can have massive impact, right? So however, what we want to be cautious of is that this is also the phase during our ovulation phase, is when we can also be the most impulsive with our money. This is when, your girlfriend's saying, hey, let's go get drinks tonight. And you're like, yes, that sounds fun. Or you're out and you're like, I just want to be out, and you're shopping. And this tends to be. And so that's why, like when my clients show up and they're like, I'm feeling great, and then we meet 2 weeks later and they say, I blew my budget, it was because of this phase, because you're feeling more impulsive. So do we have to take that away? No, we just have to plan for it, because what studies have shown is that women are 60% more likely to be impulsive during their ovulation phase than any other phase in their cycle. And that impulsivity often leads to feelings of regret, guilt, and shame. And when do you think those really are expressed and come out? Later during our luteal phase in our cycle. Okay. So then after ovulation, our hormones start to drop and we enter our luteal phase. So the first week of your luteal phase, you're still going to have some of that energy coming from your follicular and your ovulation phase. And then kind of in the second part of that, you're going to start to feel your energy drop. You're going to naturally feel more introverted. You're not going to feel like you want to go out and chit chat and socialize with people as much. So honoring that and just knowing this is where I'm at, and the best way to take care of me is to just do what feels good for me and not pleasing other people. Yeah, you can say no. When this comes to our money, what this looks like is, so let me just ask you, if you've ever experienced, like, you just have this like massive focus of like energy, and you tackle a project and it's like really thorough, and you've known you needed to do it for a while, but you just couldn't do it. We often, like, I've noticed, and I've even noticed, so I have a 15-year-old daughter, I've noticed this pattern in her where she will top to bottom clean her room and it looks amazing. She spends all day on it. I might tackle a project that just I've been putting off, or just I haven't wanted to really do. And all of a sudden I feel like incredibly focused and I put all this energy into it. We often like PMS clean and things like that. Right. We have incredible attention to detail, and increased ability to focus during these earlier days of our luteal phase. So this is a great time to sit down and actually reconcile your budget, right? Because you're really paying attention to the details. You have an ability to focus. And then what we want, like during that next phase, as maybe those feelings of overwhelm, anxiety start to bubble up, um, we want to ask what we can really do to be taking care of ourselves. So maybe that means at that point, your partner might take in a lead in managing the finances. You already have made your plan, so this isn't when we're making a plan, right? But so that you can kind of step away. And if you don't have a partner, maybe this is the time that your money's on autopilot. Let me tell you, I manage my money, my business finances and my personal finances in about an hour or less for an entire month. That's it. That's all it takes, maybe an hour a month. And I'm doing other things that bring joy in my life. Right. But I know that during that time is not the time for me to be sitting down and doing it. And I know I'm going to really want to rest the week after when my period starts. Okay, now I'm not as amped up. My hormones have come down. I started my period. I feel like just resting. So this is a good time to kind of close up those loose ends. Maybe close out your week, your month, wherever your cycle, how that starts to line up with your money, and get ready for your next cycle. So we talked about a lot. I'm sure you're going to have some questions in the live group, and wanting to know more about cycle syncing and what that means, and how we apply it more to our money. I'm really excited to dive into that with you more. Cycle syncing has really been a game changer for me, both personally and within my business. Um, and just personally, it's been really rewarding to just come back to this place of connection and really listening to my body. And I would really encourage you to start tracking and pay attention to things. Pay attention to just when you feel really outgoing. And even if you're a naturally outgoing introverted or extroverted person, see if you feel even more like you just really want to connect with people. See if you notice when you get a big burst of creativity, because that's also a superpower. And so when we start to lean in and really connect back with where our body is telling us what it wants, you're preserving your energy. And what I had one client say is, so because she would really mentally beat herself up when she would get in that PMS phase, I was just feeling really, really low and thinking, what's wrong with me? Why am I here again? And just the simple fact of just knowing and having that awareness of tracking and knowing I'm going to feel different in a few days was incredibly empowering for her. So that low wasn't as low anymore. And that she was just like, this is just where I'm at, and I'm going to feel different in a few days. And we start to just come here, and we're not like this all the time, right? And so when we can be here and now we're like this, we can start to really achieve those goals in a sustainable way, right? Because going like this on anything it's not sustainable. And I'm sure we've all experienced that with some goal or another, whether it's your health and working out, trying to diet and lose weight, whatever it is, right? When we go really hard, and it's the same thing with our money. Like if we get so into like, well, I'm just going to put myself on a really strict budget and go all in, it's not sustainable. So I really think in the bigger picture of our financial plan, and knowing what our values are, our goals are, our priorities are, a big piece of this for us as women is also listening to and embracing our cycle and each of those superpowers so that we're not getting burnt out. Because when we're not listening to what our body needs and we continue to go, that's when you're either being really self-critical in what's wrong with me. Why can't I do this? I'll share one small final anecdote before we wrap up here. I run. I'm not a particularly fast runner, but I love doing races. It's like the one thing as an adult that I've always loved sports, and I was an athletic and kid. And I love yoga. I love all different kinds of sports, but however, no sport or type of workout or anything gives me that mental mood boost as much as running does. So even though my body doesn't love it and I'm not really setting any PRs at this point, what I continue to do it because I do get that mental boost. And my husband also runs, and we will often go out and run together on the weekends. And what I have come to learn is that before I started taking my cycle into consideration with where I was and what phase, I might be on like day 2 or 3 of my period, and we were going to go out and do a 5 or 6 mile run. And he's just out there chugging along, and I'm dying. Right? I have no energy. I'm exhausted. My legs feel like I'm like wearing lead sneakers. And what starts to happen is I get into my head and start to say, God, like just like my clients, right? I'm terrible at running. I should just give this up. Like, this is so hard for me. It sucks. And I'm not even enjoying it. And look at him up there way ahead of me, and he's just putting down another great run. Now what I've realized is that that's such flawed thinking. Of course, I cannot show up like he can when I'm on day 2 or 3 of my period. That is an unrealistic goal that I'm putting on myself to be able to go out and run 5 or 6 miles. Can I do it? Yeah. Am I going to have the same run that he is going to have? No, I'm not. And that's okay. What's even better is me listening to my body and saying, you know what? I'm going to pass on the run today, and I'm just going to do some yoga or meditation instead. And that, again, is another way how we can sustainably reach our goals. So it doesn't feel like we're starting and stopping, like, oh, I was great. I worked out for 2-3 weeks, and now, like, of my period, I can't do anything. I didn't work out for 4 days. Like, oh, I got to start all over again. Right? We don't have to do that. I could go for a walk. I could do yoga. I could meditate. I could do it just to still keep me moving and reaching towards that goal. And I'm not mentally beating myself up that I'm not going to go out and have a great run like he is. Men's hormone cycle in 24-hour cycles. Women, we do not. Right. And so it helps take out that critical inner voice that's saying, like, oh, why can't you do this again today? Why are you feeling this way today when last week you had all the energy in the world, you got your to-do list done, and it's something that we're not coming to that piece of connection with, well, because we're not meant to, and that's okay. Okay. So I want to be respectful of your time. I hope you found this valuable. I can't wait to talk to you live about this later in the month and answer all your questions. And I hope you found this valuable and curious. I hope it leaves you curious and wanting to look at your own cycle and how you can come to a place of connection and really start to ask yourself, well, what impact is my cycle having in my life, and what could it look like if I made that shift to just embrace it and recognize each phase has its own superpower. Again, my name is Kathy Lemire. I've enjoyed spending this time with you, and I look forward to engaging with you later this month. Bye.